Welcome to Brett's Bookshelf. Hi, I'm Brett Clay. On Brett's Bookshelf, I review books that help you grow, either in your business or in your life. This show is an author interview with Braden Kelley. He's the author of the book Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire, a roadmap to a sustainable culture of ingenuity and purpose. Let's talk to Braden. This is Brett Clay here with Braden Kelley, the author of Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire. Braden, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Brett, for having me.
So, Braden, tell us a little bit about the content of Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire.
So the book is really about barriers to innovation. It's structured around helping people identify and remove barriers to innovation. Too often when we think about innovation, there's generally something in the way by the time that we start thinking that it's required for us to innovate again. Every company starts as the plucky young startup that is built around a single great idea. But as the company grows, if it's successful, then at some point it starts to face a growth challenge. And usually between the time that they were a startup and the time they reach the pinnacle of their success, they've put barriers to innovation in place along the way. And so the book is focused on how do you identify the ones that you've put into your organization and how do you then go about removing those barriers. Okay, great. So tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book. What was the background, the backstory behind the book? Well, I've always been passionate about the topic of innovation. And I've always been writing for my own amusement, so to speak, about the topic, but then also reading lots of books on the topic as well. And in addition to having the blog that I have, Blogging Innovation, in reading all of these different books, what I noticed is a lot of books approach the topic from a nirvana perspective. Okay. They imagine the perfect scenario and trying to get to this perfect scenario. But most organizations don't operate that way. They're in the middle of running a business. Right. And so when you go and you try to innovate, you need to try to do it from the state that you have currently in your business. And that's one of the things that I thought was missing. And so I wanted to write from that perspective of, given the current state of your business, what can you do to be more innovative? So sort of like you're in the middle of the mess. You're in the middle of the battlefield. You've got all kinds of stuff going on, missiles flying overhead. How do you plot a direction and drive the organization toward that end in the middle of all that going on? Yes, and also at the same time, I wanted to make a very accessible book that really surfaces the insights and provides people a lot of value in a compact format. Oftentimes, and you may have read some of these books, but you'll find a book that's one or two insights and it takes 250 pages to get there. Yeah, right. So this is not that. This is a very nice, easy to read, it's very accessible, and at the same time, it's still comprehensive. So what do you think, why you mentioned that an organization will get started on a good idea, they'll have a very clear mission, they'll go accomplish that, they'll take the hill, they'll build up their business, and they'll, of course, become, quote-unquote, mature. Mm-hmm. And at some point, they need to move further in a new direction somehow. What stops the company from continuing to move forward like they did in the beginning? How do you see companies sort of evolve along that innovation maturity life cycle, if you will? So there's a few different things that happen. When any business achieves success, built into that success is a growth intention. So there's tensions between the exploration mindset in the organization and the exploitation mindset in the organization. Okay. So the exploitation side is using the resources that we have as efficiently as possible. How do we exploit those resources? And then the exploration mindset is, how do we build for the future? How do we find the next big thing that we want to inject into our business? And the skill sets and the mindsets for accomplishing those two different goals are oftentimes completely different. They don't necessarily live in the same person or people. And so there's tension between those two that has to be managed within the organization if you want to have both. At the same time, there's also tension between the executive mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset. So when an organization is first getting started, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the organization, and they're really focused about, how do we achieve success? Where an executive mindset, which is a more professional mindset for a mature organization, is more focused on how do we avoid failure? How do we make the trains run on time versus the entrepreneurial mindset of, how do we do it better? You know, why even a train? What if we did something else?
Right.
So there's these tensions that need to be managed in order for an organization to remain innovative.
Now, I have a hypothesis on one source of this tension, and that is the investors. If you think about innovation and R&D, it requires taking profits that you normally would have given to the bottom line in this time period, this fiscal time period, and spending those for the future. And investors typically want their profits today so they can show that P to E and show that increased share price today. They don't care about a year from now. They just want to make their quarterly mutual fund performance number, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that hypothesis?
Well, I think there is definite challenge for public companies to not only maintain focus on making their numbers, but also gain the permission to invest in making their numbers for the future. And I think oftentimes executives, because of the high turnover at the top, tend to get very focused on the short term. And some of the most innovative companies that people call out to now are the companies where the top level has enough support for their vision and their goals that they're not under necessarily the same pressure. So Steve Jobs at Apple is under a different set of guidelines for achieving future growth. People trust that it's going to materialize if he invests. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook has purposely not taken big money so that he can maintain a certain level of control for the future vision and innovation within the organization. And it's a difficult balance to strike, but if you achieve good success with innovation, you'll gain more ability to make investment decisions going forward.
Great point. Build on success. Show the value of innovation in the organization so that investors will vote on that investment, if you will.
Right.
So what do you think is there, if you are stuck, is that okay, let's talk a little bit about what are the major barriers. Do you have like a punch list of the main barriers that you see to innovation in organizations?
Well, I think that oftentimes people don't start by building a strong foundation for innovation. So the foundation would include making sure that you have a vision for innovation and a strategy and goals. So where are you trying to go and how do you plan to get there? And how do you manage to measure whether you're getting there or not? At the same time, you have to pay attention to your innovation engine, which includes starting with powerful insights at the front end and feeding great ideas, generating great ideas, developing those ideas, not just having the ideas, but oftentimes ideas are partial ideas that need to be collected and connected in order to make great solutions. And then, of course, at the end of the idea process, you have idea evaluation, and that's a critical part, because if you pick merely good ideas, then you'll have good results. But what you really want are great results. You want those big innovations. So idea evaluation is very key. And then you have the other things that underlie innovation, like organizational psychology, information and structure, and then you want to make it all sustainable at the same time. And that means that you need to really view innovation not as a project, but as a formal approach and process that you're committed to.
Right, a competency of the organization.
Yes, you want to build a core competency of the organization and innovation that's sustainable.
So that takes a top-down commitment, or can you do this from the middle up as well in an organization?
Well, you do need top-level support, because oftentimes the best way to approach innovation is to have a certain portion of money carved off to fund your innovation projects that are that aren't necessarily just line extensions or product improvements, but
right.
the things that are a little bit riskier and that need to be managed in a portfolio approach, and managing just different risk profiles, different time horizons, to make sure that you always have innovation coming to the fore over time.
Right, exactly. So Braden, tell us, if you're in the middle of an organization, if you're in middle management, how do you get started on building an innovation capability inside your sphere of influence and responsibility?
Well, the first thing you have to do is make a commitment to innovation, because if you treat innovation like a project, you'll have short-term results. But if you want to create an innovation capability, first you have to make a commitment. Then you have to define what innovation means for your organization. And every organization will define it differently, but it is very important that you have a definition. My definition is that innovation transforms the useful seeds of invention into solutions valued above every existing alternative and makes them widely adopted. And that's one of the keys, because it's one thing to create value, but if it's not widely adopted, it's not really innovation. And so you have to define what innovation means for your organization and communicate it out widely in a concise manner to the people in the organization. And one of the examples that I like to use in regards to that topic of the importance of how you frame how you're going to innovate is the example of, if I were to say to you, okay, our goal is to make our cars 20% more fuel efficient. How are you going to do that?
Very good question.
So some people might say, well, we'll
strip off all the sheet metal and side panels,
yes,
throughout the seats.
Yes, so
reduce the weight.
So one way would be to make them lighter. Another person might think about making them more aerodynamic. A third person might think about changing the propulsion system to something that's more efficient. Another person might think about friction and reducing friction or increasing friction or whatever makes it more efficient. And so you can see very, very quickly that if you are not careful about how you frame your efforts around innovation, you're going to have people going off in completely different directions. And when you have people going off in very different directions, you can dissipate the innovation energy within the organization.
Oh, okay.
So it's important to focus people in a strong direction that will drive results in your business. But then, of course, there does need to be that flexibility so that people can pursue different approaches to solving the same problem.
Right. So it's interesting trade-off between creativity and providing direction.
Creativity happens most when direction is provided and there's a box to innovate within. I mean, it's great to have out-of-box thinking.
Right.
But if you don't
it's almost a
give
paradox
people a
there.
box, then they don't have a box to think outside.
Very interesting paradox. I like that. That's very good. So you mentioned if I'm in middle management, because I think middle management is the more interesting case. If you're a senior executive, you can make a decision and you can talk about rolling out a program. Mm-hmm. But and I'm sure you talk to senior executives all the time. But I think for most of the audiences out there, and probably the audience for your book, are more in the middle management. They have some organization that they influence. And they're trying to figure out how they can achieve their management objectives for the year, how they can grow their business or drive efficiencies in their business, and they're looking for ways to do it. So you said the first way to get started is to declare what innovation means in your organization. And I assume another one it will be to put some kind of metrics around that. At the end of the year, if I'm in middle management, I'm probably going to want to show that if I had this initiative around building an innovation capability, that I have something to show for it.
Right.
So what would be the things I would measure?
So there's a lot written about innovation metrics out there, and I don't really focus on that area. But a lot of times people will focus on things like measurements like time to market. Have we gotten faster at getting to market? Do we have more products that are responsible for driving revenue that are newer? So what is the percentage of revenue that comes from products developed within the last 3 to 5 years,
right,
and
versus living off of old cash cows,
right? So people look at metrics like that. You can also make measurements like, well, what is the number of ideas that we took from idea to implementation, or what is the profitability of the ideas that we've moved out into the market? But it gets a little bit fuzzy around measuring innovation, because oftentimes it takes time for a product to seed itself in the market.
Well, definitely, right.
And so you could be looking at some of these measures, 3 to 5 years out before you can really say for sure that you've achieved success on financial measures and things like that.
Now, this reminds me, there's an author in the change management world named Daryl Conager. He talked about how people will change if they're standing on a burning platform and there's no choice but to jump.
Right.
Now, I in my book, I take a much more, what I would consider more optimistic view. And that is, you don't have to literally be in a situation where you've let things just run completely afoul and the train's going over the cliff before you start to think about innovating or driving some change.
Right.
So what are some signs, or how do you get started? How do you know that you need to start building an innovation capability? I'm assuming most organizations would probably today say they don't have an initiative to build an innovation capability. So what's the trigger? How do they get started, or how do they justify or know that they need to go, send this banner up the pole and start driving for an innovation capability?
Well, I think the organizations that would have the most trouble pushing for an innovation capability are the ones that probably need it the least. So startups would probably have a really hard time saying that, hey, we need to invest in building an innovation capability, because they're so focused on trying to make the current ideas successful.
Okay.
But the more mature organizations, the organizations have already established that beachhead of success. You need to have a pipeline of continuous innovation or growth potential. Usually it's when the growth starts plateauing. Usually it's when their products or services start to get commoditized and the margins start to thin, and suddenly people start to worry about where the future growth is going to come from, or where the future profits are going to come from. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can start ahead of that happening in your industry or in your business. And of course that's preferable, but that's generally when people start, is when things are on fire around them.
The burning platform again,
Yes.
Unfortunately. Is there any, what are the common ways you see organizations getting ahead of that curve? What drives people to get ahead versus waiting until the platform burned out from underneath them?
Well, it's oftentimes leadership that has a vision for leading their industry and wants to be known for being the most innovative within their industry. That's often what drives somebody to get ahead of the curve and push it forward. It's much easier to get people moving when everybody realizes the forest is on fire, but it's much harder when it's just one person. But if that one person is a senior leader or a key leader in the senior leadership team, then it is much easier.
Right. I think that change is one of those things that if you get ahead of that curve, then it just starts to build momentum like a snowball, because you start to really reap rewards that put you further and further ahead of those that aren't innovating at that rate.
Yes, and one of the things that people often neglect is the fact that if you do get ahead of the curve, then the best people are probably going to want to work for you and not your competition.
Again, another snowball momentum building effect of that. Well, one other question for you I have is, I've been actually wanting to ask this for a long time, reading your blog and contributing to it as well. What do you see as the difference between what I would call change leadership? Some people there's this idea of change management. I'm trying to talk about something in my work that I call change leadership. But how do you see that being different than innovation in an organization? In other words, if an organization builds a change leadership capability versus an innovation capability, are those synonymous, or what are the subtle distinctions?
I would say there's probably a subtle distinction, but what I would say is that managing innovation is about managing change. Because ultimately, when you're trying to instill innovation within your organization and bring innovation to the market, you're trying to change what value drivers you're focused on. And that means changing how the organization is structured potentially, how people are compensated, how people are talking about how they do their jobs, or even how they do their jobs. Lots of things change. So my favorite story is Apple around the iPod. So Apple was a computer company, and then suddenly they get this idea that they want to bring a music device to the market. So imagine all the change that had to happen within the organization to support that one new product.
Right.
They had to learn about the music industry. So who knows about the music industry
You're right.
within the company?
Exactly.
They had to learn about making consumer electronics, making things in much higher volumes at much lower costs. They had to learn about new channels of distribution. They had to learn about lots of different things and become excellent at them very quickly, which means lots of change. So managing innovation is about managing change. So if you can master and create a competency around change leadership, it will be easier for you to innovate.
Exactly. Then there's another subtle, it's almost like a Venn diagram here on these different terms. There's the idea of the learning organization. How do you see that comparing to learning, innovation and change?
So in my mind, innovation, change, and learning sort of intersect, as you're sort of alluding to. So if we talked about sort of change leadership and change being very important to the process of innovation, and the only difference is minor difference around the content that you're working on. So change leadership could be about making positive change within the organization. Innovation is more about bringing change to the marketplace. And I would say that the learning organization intersects because in my mind, it's not about failing fast. There's a lot of chatter out there about, fail fast, fail cheap, fail often.
Right.
I have a different take on that.
Okay.
I think it's important to learn fast. So what are you
There you
doing
go.
to instrument your organization, instrument your projects to make sure that whether it's failure that happens or success, that you learn something from it? Because you can learn from success too, and I don't think enough people talk about that. And I don't think people instrument for that enough. Because if you instrument for learning from success or failure, then when you have a success, not only are you successful, but you can be more successful in the future because there's always those few things that you could do better.
Right. In fact, that's one of the things I say about change leadership versus learning is that change is applied learning. It's one thing to learn, but then you need to actually go do something with that and take an action and make something happen. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Braden. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and I really look forward to reading this book in a lot more detail. It's one of those situations where when a book with so many great ideas like this, you have to read it many times until you really internalize how important the various ideas are that you've put in there.
Well, thank you, Brett, for the conversation. And again, I have worked very hard to make the book accessible and an easy read without cheapening it, and it's still very comprehensive and a lot of good stuff in there. So I hope you read it again and enjoy it again, and I hope lots of people have the opportunity to do it out there as well.
Great. Thank you again, Braden.
Thank you, Brett.